we're going to start with the panelists introducing themselves, starting from Heidi, who has the microphone.
Hello, I'm Heidi. You all know me. I worked at Utah Newborn Screening Lab, so in addition to just GAMT in general, this is a really interesting topic.
Hello, my name is Bijo Varughese, and I am here to represent for the State Hygienic Laboratory at the University of Iowa. We did the screening for 4 states, which is Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Alaska. And I'm proud to say that we are the only screening lab which works 24/7. So that's the beauty of our lab.
Hi everyone, I'm Allison Forkner. I'm with the Indiana Department of Health Newborn Screening Program, and I've been there for about 7 years now.
My name is Barb Lesko. I am the manager of the Newborn Screening Lab. We contract with the state of Indiana to do testing, and I have been with the lab for 35 years.
I'm Kim Hart, and from Utah, which we started screening. We're the first state to start screening for GAMT deficiency in 2015, and we did that with our strong partnerships with ACD and ARUP laboratories. I've left newborn screening a few months ago, so I'm no longer with the Department of Health, but I was there for 12 years.
Hi, I'm Sarah Young. I'm a lab director at Duke University, the Biochemical Genetics Lab. I do not do newborn screening, but I am involved in the follow-up of newborn screening.
Okay, great, thank you. And I'm going to start asking a couple of questions to the representative of the public health laboratory, and starting with Kim, who has been an early adopter. What do you think is the biggest challenge from the laboratory point of view, the biggest challenge in introducing GAN deficiency, but actually any new condition in, within a newborn screening lab, and also from the follow-up point of view?
I could give you a long, drawn-out answer. So the first thing to know is every state is different. So you have to figure out what your state does in order to add a new condition. So that might be easy to find out. It might be a little bit more challenging. I can talk to the point what Utah does. So in Utah, we have a newborn screening advisory committee, and a lot of states have those. And you would review it, you've got specialists on the committee, you review the disorder, you would essentially vote to add the disorder or not. And then usually there's a legislative component. So either the executive director of the Department of Health, you might have some legislative mandates. In Utah, the only legislative mandate is a budget approval, so we have a kit fee. So once the budget's approved and the executive branch of the newborn screening or the public health department approves it, it can go into rule. That's one piece, and that usually takes the longest, trying to travel down that road. It can take up to a year to year and a half to get that added on to the state rule. The other piece is in the laboratory. So depending on how the lab is set up, if they use kit-based reagents versus laboratory-developed tests, it can differ in what you have to do for validation. So that can take a little bit of time. So I would say that the biggest hurdle is probably coordinating all of those efforts and hopefully coming to a time frame that's going to be as short as possible. So just coordinating the lab, getting that test validated, up and running, and then coordinating the logistical pieces of increasing kit fees, and then getting that added to the rule.
Yeah, I think you are working on.
Still, we are working on working in the sense like there are so many analytes which is coming up in such a short duration of time. So we are in the struggling phase of finding out, like prioritizing, not only basis of the time frame, we need to prioritize. Like I was talking to my supervisor and I was telling her, like, we are at the center of an intersection. We don't know, like, LDTs, non-LDTs, derivatized, non-derivatized, FDA approved kits which will be in market, something which is going to be getting FDA approved. So we are really juggling with all our options. Like, because we, at this point, we know that we want to develop as a point of a researcher, whenever they comes to a parent patient or that group, we always feel that we have a lot of things on our shoulder. So we want to give the best, but at the same time, there are so many logistics, the instrumentation limitations, like most of the screening labs don't have like so many instruments to play around. Development definitely requires a separate instrument. You cannot stop your production line and do development. So the road ahead is quite challenging, but at the same time, we are trying to push all the efforts so that eventually the picture is complete. So at my lab, the biggest challenge what we face is, like, we are still prioritizing some of the assays, and with addition of new tests, the workflow of the lab changes. Like, we were doing some of the methodology which requires like 3-hour incubation. Now we'll be switching out to 18-hour incubation. So the entire flow of the lab changes. And we were short of some of the instruments because we never have a development instrument. So now we lucky to got a development instrument. And so getting an instrument is not the end of the story, it's the beginning. You need to get it upcoming, running, and make sure all the tests are passing. So we are trying to be one step ahead, but still struggling with some of the loose ends.
And if I can make a comment, and I think I am speaking for the whole community of a laboratory, like Dr. Young's and mine and everything. I think that we are all available if you need any question, if you have any question or you need any help. I think you need to feel free, and this is true for all the laboratories represented here, that you can reach out to any one of us.
Yeah, that's the biggest beauty of the newborn screening group. It's that everybody is happy to help. Like, you reach out for samples, you reach out for methodology. We have been partnering with New York for some of our old SOPs, and we know that everybody has a common goal, and I always take that if your intentions are clear, your outcome will be good. Yeah. So we are trying our best.
From the follow-up point of view, what was a challenge? And I know that Kim, in Utah we have we are a two-screen state. And I think we all know that two-screen model, at least in my opinion, is helping and is very helpful. What do you think specifically for GAMT deficiency? Was it helpful to be in a two-screen state? Or?
Yeah, from my perspective, it's a little biased, of course, because that's all I know is the two-screen. We did have. You do have quite a few false positives on the first screen, especially in the NICU population, and we could weed those out from the second screen, and we know this because of the case that we identified, that level went high. It almost doubled or tripled from the first screen to the second screen. So definitely having a second screen, or some states might have a protocol where they just do a standard first screen. If it's normal, they can be done, and then maybe they can have a recall screen just to follow up or double check that level. But as far as the follow up for an abnormal screen, it wasn't too difficult because you're working with the same group of metabolic specialists, so it's just another disorder for them to have to schedule into their clinic. And that's really important for us, as we have a really close relationship with the clinicians, and we basically have, the back line, and we tell them, oh, we've got an abnormal screen, we can get the confirmatory test ordered really fast, they can get the patient in within a few days, they can even call and have them come into clinic, or order additional tests right away. So just having a really close communication and relationship with your metabolic specialist is important, and we didn't have any issues as far as trying to add in another condition. So I think they're more nervous about some of the other disorders that we're having to add in the near future that will be a little bit more problematic. But as far as GAMT deficiency specifically, that's not an issue.
Okay. Barb, do you have any? We don't necessarily do follow-up, so okay. Yeah. Indiana has taken, I think that we have a routine rescreen protocol for our NICU population, so even though we don't have two routine samples, we would screen those babies multiple times. So I think that would help. Indiana also has taken a model of, there is a care coordination group that is contracted with the Department of Health, that the laboratory will call out presumptive positives to both the submitting hospital and the care group. And so, like you said, it's the same group of people. The relationships have been developed. The processes are all in place, and it's really just continually getting together and looking for gaps.
So yeah, another model for how newborn screening is done. And are you planning on adding a GAMT?
Yeah, so we are right now in the process of readying the laboratory. So we have I'll let Allison speak to the process of adding disorders a little in Indiana. But in the laboratory, we try and look futuristically. What do we need to be prepared for? Obviously, the RESP disorders, they're a lot easier to see coming. With Indiana's model, we can be blindsided a little bit with some other disorders, but like a lot of states, we have an advisory group that fields all of these potential nominated conditions. So we are in the process of adding an additional mass spec, determining, we'll start working on method validation for both GAMT and MPS II. Those are the two RESP conditions that we are currently not screening for. We also have nominations for Gaucher and Niemann-Pick that we will, and Duchenne, that we will all be considering. So I think from a laboratory perspective, just the fast and furiousness of which things are coming down the pike is a little bit overwhelming. And then the FDA approval, the rule change. In terms of rare diseases, when a lot of things are lab developed, and the uncertainty of what's going to be required of testing. For GAMT, there's no option currently other than lab developed testing. And so I know that there are a couple companies that are looking at trying to add it to a kit. We currently use Revity Neobase 2. So for us, we have to look at, do we have more throughput for the instrument and run that separately, or do we take Neobase 2 off label and have to revalidate everything else that we're already doing? And then what does that mean, and what does that look like? I think those are still a lot of unknowns, and so we will probably, at least initially, depending on the timeline with which we're asked to do it, we'll look both at GAMT separately, but we will look at adding MPS 2 into our new LSD kit. Yeah.
I can provide Indiana's perspective on kind of adding conditions. Similar to Utah, we do have our advisory committee, like Barb said, as well. They will evaluate any either nominated condition or RUSP-approved condition. After that, they'll take a vote, and if they recommend that Indiana adds that, it goes up to our all the way through our leadership chain at the health department. And then we do also have to update what we call our rules as well. And that can take, again, 12 to 18 months just to get that updated. And that can also come with an increase in the newborn screening fee. So our state budget agency has to approve that as well. So those are kind of the challenges we face in Indiana and how we're structured. But it is similar to Utah.
Thank you. I have a question.
I just have one thing to add, that North Carolina is one of the states that has the RUSP alignment law, which actually has simplified things for the state lab when they have 3 years to add on a new test added to the RUSP. With that, they get the promise of dedicated funds and resources, and that has enormously helped push forward the program in North Carolina. It was one of the it was the first state to bring on the tandem mass spec assay, and then there was, a decade or two of falling behind and not keeping up, and that's all to do with funding and resources. And so the having it legislated is incredibly helpful.
So now I want to kind of switch gear a little bit, and I have a question for Dr. Young. And so one thing that's been talked a lot about, especially genetics meeting lately, is newborn screening by genome screening. How do you think that is going to affect screening for this condition, for the creatine deficiency, but in general for all the other conditions that are not currently in the RASP?
So I'm sure a lot of folks here are aware of some research projects that are ongoing. In fact, to my understanding, there are more than 20 across the world where newborns are being screened for in the newborn by genome sequencing. So this is, genome sequencing, of course, is the disrupting technology that has revolutionized diagnosis in the last decade. And with that, these research programs are asking very specific questions as to, can we implement this technology so that newborns are screened for hundreds of disorders that will, facilitate earlier diagnosis and implementation of proper treatments. There are so many obstacles and challenges to doing this. One of the first things you have to consider is the consent process. It's one thing to do a targeted panel of analytes or enzymes that we currently do in the newborn period, where the consent is actually implicit in the process, in that the parents are not actually asked for consent. It's implied when the blood spot is collected. Versus something where you have an intensive consent process. One group that has successfully addressed this is actually based in North Carolina, the Early Check program. This is a research project where it's an opt-in newborn screening. The parents go online, they read about their research, and that is part of the consent process. And they can volunteer to be part of it and choose what panel they want. And incidentally, the creatine transporter gene is included in one of those options. So that is being done for those folks who sign up. The other side of it is you have to curate the panels very carefully, understand the targets, and acknowledge the fact that if the sequencing results turn a variance of uncertain significance, these will not be reported, even if it could be potentially disease-causing. So we won't capture everything. And then finally, the tail end of that is, how do you release the results to the families and counsel them? We do not have enough genetic counselors on this planet to deal with that amount of work. And so there are, in order to do this as a public health initiative, we're many, many years away from that, and it's to do with the resources that are not available.
Thank you, Sarah. I have one more quick question for Sarah and then one for Heidi. Sarah, do you see metabolomics having a role in newborn screening?
Metabolomics in its current state, no. It needs to, it's in my opinion, a semi-quantitative test that gives you, points you in certain directions, gives you hints of things that might be wrong, but it doesn't have the clinical validity, in my opinion, and there are, even analytical issues to implement. Will just be flooded with too many false positives, and we will miss diseases using that technology.
Thank you. Heidi, from the parent perspective, now having heard everything, what's your first reaction?
How do we make this work for all three diseases? I was at a meeting with Dr. Kingsmore from Rady's Children, and he was describing the genomic screening that he was working on and describing his selection of what genes to look at, and he was really aggressive in what he was removing. And while early check, it's really exciting that they're keeping CTD on there, though they've not found anyone. He definitely CTD wasn't making the cut for his criteria. And I understand, it's a floodgate, and I understand there's VUSs to deal with, but the parents are consenting in this process. With newborn screening, it's a mandate. You got to actually opt out. This is going to happen unless you are keen to it and and you don't want it, and I don't know why you wouldn't want it. But with genomic, you're reading consent, you're understanding what are the risks, and I sure think that our community would like to take that risk of finding a VUS just so they can get that early diagnosis. And I also think that there's huge value, even if there's not an FDA-regulated or approved drug for CTD, there's huge value in getting started with all the therapies and knowing what you're dealing with and joining a community, rallying, supporting research. We're going to be better off. So it's hard. A parent asked, how do I get this, going in my state? And I think for GAMT, the answer is you show up at the advisory committee meetings. You ask, when are you going to meet? Can I come in person or virtual? And you are present. So they go, this disease is in our state, and it matters, and people care, and I'm getting pressure from citizens. But I'm worried about genetic screening, and I think we have to raise our voice and go, please don't be overly conservative. You're not doing us a favor.
I heard the ACMG meeting had a great session on this, and out of all the different programs, apparently only 50 genes overlapped with the different panels that they were choosing. Even though it's genomics, it's not. It's still targeted. They target very specific genes, and only out of all these different, they only agreed on 50 of them. So I think you're right. It is very much a biased process still, just like the targeted newborn screening is very biased.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I would like to take a question from the audience.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Valerie, and I'm from the State Hygienic Lab. I work with Bijo. I've been involved in newborn screening now since 2006. I started in the laboratory, and now I am the clinical lab supervisor. Just for the parents and anyone who doesn't really know a lot about newborn screening, we have panels of disorders, and each one of them is considered a rare disorder. So for each one of those disorders, there's only a handful of people in the world who are impacted. But once you start screening for multiple rare disorders, what you end up having is a large cohort of people that your states are identifying. And each rare disorder that we screen for has something called a false positive rate, meaning some of our assays will identify families who get a call from their newborn screening program saying, your kid might have this rare disorder, but don't Google it because it's really scary. And there's trauma associated with false positives. There's people more experted than me out there working on this. But I do think we'd be remiss if I didn't make the point that absolutely we want to screen for GAMT, because the heartbreaking stories that I've heard in the last 2 days about what happens for kids who aren't identified early with GAMT. And there are heartbreaking stories out there for all of these rare disorders where early intervention matters, but it also matters that we have assays that are sensitive and specific, and they're well thought out, and they can be done in a timely fashion, and that we have follow-up programs where there are genetic counselors and specialists, and that work to make that experience for you guys who got really unexpected news as not easy, but manageable as possible. Thank you.
Any questions?
So my name is Okati Blante. I'm from the Arizona Newborn Screening Lab. I've been there for 12 years now, but I'm more focused now on the mass spectrometry section. And we're actually developing, in the process of implementing GAMT testing. Like you said, we're at Ross Alliance State 2 in Arizona. For GAMT specifically, I think the fact that it's a lab-developed test, as compared to the issue like we dealt with something like the C26 LPC for XALD, there aren't like too many methods to compare, and in a sense, it's good for us, I think, because then there's less time wasted on trying to figure out which one is best. And I just talked to a lot of experts here regarding the, whether a derivatized or non-derivatized, and Dr. Pasqualli was very informative on that to see how it's pretty much equivalent. One of the things that I think in labs that are really poignant, like the most crucial problems that we encounter trying to implement a new test on the technical side, the legislative side and stuff like that. Thanks to the Ross Alignment, we don't have to deal with that anymore. The instrumentation is one issue. It's very difficult, especially if the instruments are under a reagent rental contract. You have to talk to the manufacturer for them to give you the green light to use those for any analyte that's outside their panel. So that's what we had to do in Arizona. We're considering for NeoBase 2, which we use as well. You probably have noticed that too, where the false positive rate with the C26 LPC for XALD it's insane, and the variability is just not conducive to any. It doesn't help make any true conclusion. There's no correlation. So we thought about taking the opportunity of implementing GAMT to multiplex XALD onto on the same multiplex the XALD method. We have then the benefit of using XALD, testing XALD on negative mode like we've been doing as a second year, but now it can become a first year. And instead of a subset of samples, now we get to test all the samples. And we absorb the cost because we were going to implement GAMT anyway. So those are some of the aspects we've looked at, and I think it's really the ability to get positive samples that is the #1 problem. Because there's a lot of research that gives us hints into, get us on the right path in terms of methodology and all those things, but it's the positive samples. So if anybody has, any leads on how to work on that, that would be awesome. Thanks.
I know that there's CDC controls with elevated guanidino acetate. Are those helpful at this time, and then you need positive controls for your final validation?
Yeah. Yes, the CDC has been very helpful with that. We've had linearity material and all those things. We've had linearity material from the CDC that have been very helpful. I think they were prepared ahead of time. That was really great. But the thing is, especially with the new FDA ruling on LDTs, it's more rigorous. The validation is more rigorous. Even the method development is more rigorous. And one of the biggest things in that, with that regard is really the metrics, the comparability of the metrics from patient sample or something that's been made, because CDC samples are typically devoid of protein, like a good portion of hematocrit, for example, or some of the bilirubin and stuff like that. We can do that with patient samples. So now it's being able to translate the linearity, for example, into actual metrics. Yeah, that's where the pickle. That's what the biggest difficulty is right now, too. So.
Okay, we want to help you be able to validate.
I appreciate
that. I would like to ask one small question. Like, which platform are you using for your assays? Like.
We use the QSight system, but it's an LC-MS method, but we're exploring the polarity switching option that we have with the QSights. So we can both screen.
So for me, I envisage that a world where you should not be getting a restriction, that you are using QSight, so even if your C26 doesn't good perform marker in that, you are still doing it, and nothing comes for free. Everything is being charged. Yes. So I want that it to be like a little bit open-ended, where people should not be worried. Like, I have a Waters mass spec, I cannot use Neobase. I have a Waters mark system, I cannot use Chrome system. So it should be a little bit like earlier. The companies who manufacture kit only focus on kit, so they have validated their kit on multiple instruments. So now the world is becoming so and so crunch and so narrow that I have heard from many laboratories, like, even if they know that is not the best what they have, they don't have the scope of expanding. So that is something which always I am also concerned. Like we have all of the water system. So now when you look for the Neobase 2, Neobase 2 is validated on TQDs. It is not validated on TQS micros, which is much more sensitive. So still we are also facing this kind of challenge. But at the same time, if government is listening and they're really concerned about all these things, so I want them to have a word that irrespective of the make, it should be open-ended, that everybody can use and validate. As long as it is validated, it is good to use. So let's see how it ends up.
Yeah. I think that's one other benefit of the path we've chosen in Arizona. By using the main difference between Neobase and Neobase 2 is just to see the XALD, I mean the C26 LPC, the long, those C24, 26 and C20, 24, 26. So with the ability of moving C26 into the LDT, then you can basically do it on any instrument. And most of the sensitivity of most of the instruments now are pretty equivalent, so there shouldn't be an issue.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick announcement before maybe a few more questions. Parents who need to leave to get their children settled, you may do so now. And we will be setting up for lunch. So we have folks in the back who are bringing water and the like. We'll allow for a couple more questions before we need to take a break. Thanks.
Question here.
Okay, this is not a great, deep genetic question, but talking about the committees. And Sarah, you might be able to pay me now or pay me later. I kind of feel like with the GAMT children, like my son gets many dollars of funding every year to now support him, whereas if they had thought forward and thought, let's go ahead and figure out what's the matter, do they have those conversations when they decide what they're going to put on their newborn screening?
So we do take the economics into account. Usually they have studies like how much does it cost to treat somebody who's diagnosed after the newborn period compared to what it would look like pre-symptoms, so post-symptomatic versus pre-symptomatic. So those are done. And I know the CDC usually have quality of life indicator studies. So those things are done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say that was one of the big arguments that brought on the expanded newborn screening in the first place, the cost-benefit ratio to the health system and to the community, and very much showed that's the model they use in Europe, where they're much more cautious about adding things. It's usually one disease at a time. So I would say that publications that document these and the success of the newborn screen and how it's benefited the community from every aspect, from the individual point of view, but also from the cost to the families, to the communities. It's a very important question. Thank you for bringing it up.
Okay, I just want to make a quick comment about the validation and the need for a sample. These are rare diseases, so the sample available, the blood spot available are very, very limited. The number of the amount of blood spot that will be needed for a validation is huge, especially following bioanalytical guidance. In my experience, even the FDA understands that. So there are ways to go around and use a surrogate. Then, of course, you still need to prove that the real sample you can identify, but that limits a little bit the usage. So you can use the minimum amount of blood spots so they can be preserved and be available for a larger community. And we can discuss that later. Okay, yes.
So I wanted to shift a little bit back to the false positive comment. Yeah. So from the follow-up newborn screening perspective, I think it's really important for labs to have strong follow-up programs and not just leave it to labs calling out to specialists, because that's oftentimes when things get dropped. We've heard stories about parents getting random calls from maybe a medical assistant who doesn't know anything and just tells them, oh, go to the lab, you have your new baby has some strange disorder. And of course, those things are traumatic to the families. So in Utah, we've always had a really strong follow-up program. I'm a genetic counselor, and I ended up hiring 2 other genetic counselors, and we do all of these critical call-outs. And the clinicians actually, so that the pediatricians really like it, when we call them and tell them what the disorder is, and then they say, you know what, that's a little bit beyond my scope. Can you reach out to the family? And so once we kind of get that consent from the physician that, yeah, it's probably better if you guys call, we're usually calling the families, and they appreciate that because we can communicate to them, what we're seeing, false positive rates, the possibility of it being a true positive. And we help them, we walk them through the process and make sure they have the lab orders. So we're paying for this confirmatory test, sending them to the lab, telling them every step of the way, okay, we have the blood sample in. It's going to be 2 more days before we have a result. We call you as soon as we have the result. So these parents aren't hanging in limbo. So that's one thing I think that's really important that not all states have, are these strong follow-up programs. And I think they're often overlooked. And the focus is really on the laboratory.
Thank you, Kim. That's absolutely true. I think that we need to look at the newborn screening as a full program, and definitely the follow-up is one of the most critical most critical part of this program. Are there any other questions? So if there are no other questions, I want to thank all the panelists for their participation, and thank all of you for staying and contributing to the discussion. Thank you.